cheese can be both sweet and savory, ready to use immediately in not only cakes and breads, but also dips, spreads, and main courses, like pastas, pizzas, or even tostinis. Hello shepherds, welcome back, and if you're new here, hello. This is where we talk all things sheepy. My name's Megan, and so I've shown you how to make traditional ricotta from leftover whey, which I'll link below. Today though, I thought it would be fun to make a cheese for a busier schedule. It's a simple cheese that doesn't require any special equipment and gives you a great base for several dishes. Plus, I've been craving manicotti lately. So for today, I'm talking about ricotta. But this ricotta uses whole milk as its base to create a rich, smooth, and fresh cheese with a sweeter flavor than traditional ricotta. But also on the plus side, it takes minutes to make. And as an added bonus, you can transform it into an aged grating cheese that I like to use as a Parmesan substitute. But let me know in the comments if that's something you're interested in. So let's get started. I'll need to grab some milk, and while I'm doing that, let's talk milk. I'm using skim sheep's milk, but almost any milk will do, except ultra pasteurized. Let's all collectively rattle our milk pails angrily at that stuff. It's just terrible for cheese making. But moving on. Because of the nature of sheep's milk having such a large amount of total solids, I'm not really concerned about a low cheese yield. With making whole milk ricotta, the fat in our milks help give our cheese that richness, overall body, and creaminess, whereas protein levels are super important for forming our curds. So when we use skimmed or semi-skimmed milk, it can really make our cheese less creamy, even dry, or at worst, gritty. The curds may be smaller, but in a negative way, making the texture just a bit off. So if you have any questions about your milk properties, you might feel better if you use whole milk rather than skimmed. Also, if your animal has less cream, you may want to add cream to your milk. This will really affect the overall texture of your cheeses later on, giving that truly luxurious and smooth feel. So it's just something to think about when we're making cheese. And on that note, all types of farm animals can make really great cheese, except chickens. For equipment, we'll need a heavy bottom saucepan, a cheesecloth, linen or muslin, and some form of acid. The type of acid you pick may affect the texture and flavor of your cheese. I'm using citric acid diluted in plain well water. Citric acid is usually available in the canning section of the grocers or candy making section. Lemon juice and lime juice work well too, as well as white vinegar and the other vinegars as well, but just remember that the flavors will carry through, so that may affect some of your recipes. I'll talk about that near the end of the video. And so sometimes it's fun to do a mini batch of cheese. So I'm just using a bit over a quart of skim sheep's milk. I used to have a Holstein, and she was rather old and retired from a dairy, and let me tell you, her milk was so thin, especially compared to sheep's or even goat's milk. So for milk like hers, I would increase the milk amount in the recipe like this. But for smaller livestock, your yield would probably be greater. And so I think now that we've covered all the little bits of info, let's go ahead and add our choice milk into our pot. If you're using cream, let's add that in now as well. I didn't state it as an ingredient, but also I like to add a touch of buttermilk culture. Not too much, really, otherwise it will taste more like sour cream near the end. But just a nice cube or a dash and a low incubation time to give this cheese a subtle depth of flavor, but you can do without it. Also, let's add a pinch of salt, and then later on we can add more and adjust the salt to taste if needed. Next, we're going to heat up our milk slowly to 180 to 190 degrees Fahrenheit or 82 to 88 degrees Celsius over medium-low heat. We want to stir often at this point to try and avoid scorching our milk to the bottom of the pan, and to make sure that our milk heats evenly and thoroughly. Once we reach our temp, let's turn off our heat and add our acid. I'm using our citric acid and stirring gently, mixing our acids thoroughly throughout our milk. You may notice that there's wispy clouds of curds already starting to form. That's a good sign that the acid's working. Next, let's stop stirring our pot and let our curds come together for about 20 minutes. I had to run off real quick, so for this batch here, I ended up staying for over an hour. Things happen, but it's okay because this is a low-key cheese. Next, we're going to pour or ladle our curds into our cheesecloth lined bowl. I'm reserving this whey to make a brown cheese later on. And if you look at the whey here, you can see there's still milk solids in there. If the whey is clear, there may not be enough proteins left to make a brown cheese. such as the cooked whey-based ricotta from another video, but we can squeeze more cheese out this way. If you don't want to reserve it, that's okay. It does help to reserve just a little to adjust the moisture levels of our ricotta later on. And so we want to drain our ricotta for a few minutes. If you want softer curds, drain for 5 to 10 minutes. If you want firmer curds, drain longer. If you find you accidentally made your cheese too firm, you can stir some of that whey back in. If you're making spreads, you may want a softer cheese. I want to use this for a variety of dishes, so I'm aiming for firmer cheese, especially with the lasagna types. It's easier to work with a drier ricotta as this prevents a soupy dish, but I'm also going to reserve just a little bit to do a spread for today's video. So now we've drained our cheese. Don't forget to taste the sample. It should be clean, fresh, and adjust the salt if needed. This is already pretty creamy and smooth, so let's whip it up and turn it into a fun spread. This is a really quick recipe, and I'm really just winging it and adjusting the intensity as we go. Because of all the frost, most of my edible flowers are gone, and we only have a handful of fresh tomatoes left. So I'm going to slice up this bread and in a small ramekin, roast our tomatoes with a little garlic and some olive oil. Then with a dash of salt and pepper and bake till bubbly at 350 degrees Fahrenheit or 177 degrees Celsius. It should take only a few minutes. And for the cheese on the sweeter side, I'm going to whip up our cheese with a dash of olive oil. Not too much, and about a tablespoon of lime juice. Mostly because that's what I have on hand this week. To garnish, we have lemon thyme from the garden, as well as some borage flowers, which have a really nice and bright flavor. And then a fun amount of honey. I'm going to go ahead and snack while the tomatoes and garlic are roasting. And this is so good. Unfortunately, we only have 2 flowers left of the borage, so I think I'm going to add some of our Thai basils and try that. Just a little here or there. And some more honey. Yeah, so the basil flowers are very strong. I love this basil for spring rolls, but I really prefer the subtlety of the borage flowers. I love how the textures of the creamy cheese contrast really well with the toasted bread. I had lightly brushed it with sheep's butter on it to get a little bit of browning, but flavor-wise, the first thing to hit is the honey with milky notes, and the sheep cheese adds this luxurious touch. But with the Thai basil, it's really mostly just basil coming through. Even though the flowers are microscopic, I think they carry the load of the flavor. Okay, so now that the tomatoes are sizzling, let's mash our garlic into the cheesy bread. And it's all good. The tomatoes are bright and complex. I love the textures, and it reminds me of bruschetta. It's super fun, but I think it's funny how different the cheeses come across with completely different characters based on how you dress the cheese up. So to store this, let's make sure it's covered, and it may last for about a week in the fridge. If you want to freeze it, it may get grainy, so that's just something to keep in mind. In breads, that may be less critical, but as a spread, it can lose its pizzazz. Okay, so let's talk substitutions, tips, and troubleshooting. For substitutions to citric acid, the main thing is how will the flavor affect your final cheese. Using pure lemon or lime juice may compete with your final recipe. The acid bounce can also be inconsistent, so if you end up with not curdling, it helps add a tablespoon of vinegar. But if you add too much acid, it often yields a grainy texture, which may be off-putting to some folks. So let's dive into it. The main problem people tend to bump into in cheese making is using bad milk. So for those of you with farm fresh milk, you may already avoid a lot of the common problems. If you have any ricotta that's off flavors though, barny, dusty, musky, etc., your fresh cheese should taste bright, fresh, and clean, with a mild milky and creamy taste. If there's something off in the flavors, that means something went wrong in your milk handling process, and it's time to troubleshoot. If your cheese tastes sour, that means there's too much acid. If you find that your curds aren't forming at all, make sure that you're not using ultra-pasteurized milk, or for the home dairy producers, it helps to not over-pasteurize your milk at home and adjust your heat processes. The high heat process changes the protein structure and can make it so that the curds don't form. The next thing to check is the temps of your pot as you're making your ricotta. If you aren't heating your milk up enough, to put it crudely, it's tougher for the acids that you just added to interact with the milk. So to make sure you have an accurate thermometer if you're using one. And also on that note of heat, if you crank up the heat real fast, you can reach your temperature faster, but really not only risk scorching your milk, but making your final cheese too grainy. Though some texture is normal, But if you find your cheese too grainy, try taking it slower with the heat and maybe adding a little bit more cream and see how that works for you next time. Also, if you find the texture of cheese to be inconsistent or grainy, make sure to stir your milk briefly but well or thorough after adding your acid, so that the acid is evenly distributed throughout the milk. Lastly, what to do with all this ricotta. First up, we have pasta fillings, from shells to lasagna, and then also in making pasta sauces, it also makes a great topping to salads, tacos, toast spreads, or even baked into muffins, cookies, and cakes just for starters. Okay, so I think I just about covered it, but let me know what you made with your ricotta. If you made it this far, an extra special thank you. I appreciate you. Don't forget to like, subscribe. Thank you for watching, and until the next time, stay soft, stay fluffy, and most importantly, stay true to you.